I want you to imagine, just for a second, standing at the absolute edge of human knowledge. It is 1930. You are out on the unforgiving, just howling ice of the Antarctic plateau.
Oh, and it is brutally cold.
Right. The wind is screaming, the temperature is plunging to like 50 below zero, and you are surrounded by literally nothing but the white, blank spaces of the map.
A terrifying place to be.
Exactly. But the thing is, you aren't afraid. You are armed with the most advanced, cutting-edge technology of your era. You have these custom-engineered drills. You have heavily modified airplanes. You have seismic equipment that represents, the absolute pinnacle of human ingenuity.
Yeah, you feel invincible.
You do. You are the vanguard of human reason, and you are there to drill down into the ice, to peel back the geological layers, and basically prove human mastery over the natural world.
Right.
But instead, you unearth something that completely shatters that mastery. You pull up a mirror from the deep past, and looking into it, you realize that humanity is, it's nothing but a cosmic afterthought.
That shattering of the human ego is exactly what we are diving into today.
Welcome to our deep dive.
Yes, welcome. Because today we are looking at the sources covering the Miskatonic University expedition to Antarctica, the really infamous journey chronicled in H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness.
Such a classic.
It is, but the way we are going to look at this isn't just as, a standard monster story. We have a mountain of notes, historical context, and literary analysis to sift through. Because what makes this narrative so incredibly potent isn't actually the supernatural element.
No, it's the science.
Exactly.
That's the science.
Right. And as I was reading through our research for this, the thing that immediately jumped out to me is just the sheer confidence of this expedition. And these aren't thrill seekers or adventurers, they are academics. William Dyer, a geologist of considerable reputation, a man who has spent his career reading the Earth's deepest records. And beside him, his student Danforth, younger, more sensitive, and, as we will discover, far more vulnerable to what the ice is about to reveal.
They think science is their shield, but they are literally using it as a shovel to dig their own grave.
That is exactly what happens.
Because the drill works. It works perfectly. And that perfect functioning is exactly what gets them into trouble.
Too perfectly. They drill down into the ice and they pull up core samples of rock from deep, deep below. Specifically, they bring up fragments of Archean slate.
The notes say there are these peculiar, triangular, striated markings on this ancient slate. Basically footprints.
Exactly. Complex, highly evolved footprint.
Which is geologically impossible. You can't have a complex footprint a billion years ago when nothing more complex than a sponge is supposed to exist.
It completely upends everything they know.
It's like digging up a Roman ruin and finding a perfectly preserved iPhone.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And this impossibility just absolutely breaks the brain of Lake, the expedition's biologist.
It completely hijacks him. Lake is a man defined by scientific curiosity. And when the evidence contradicts the established laws of nature, that curiosity just overrides his caution, his protocols, even his chain of command.
He goes rogue.
He essentially goes rogue.
He takes a sub-expedition northwest, pushing way out into uncharted territory. He uses dynamite to blast a shallow shaft into the ice, and he breaks into a subterranean cave system.
And what he finds down there?
I mean, this is the turning point of the whole narrative. He finds 14 specimens down there in the ice. 8 are perfectly intact, frozen solid, and 6 are damaged.
And these are the creatures that he provisionally dubs the Elder Things.
Yes. And the way this discovery is presented to you as the listener, or the reader in this case, is just brilliant. Lovecraft doesn't rely on traditional tropes of gothic horror at all.
No, he really avoids them.
There are no glowing red eyes in the dark, no jump scares, no lightning flashes. Instead, the horror is delivered via an autopsy report.
Which makes it feel so real.
It really does. Lake sets up a dissection table in the freezing cold, cuts one of these things open, and transmits his anatomical findings over a shortwave radio back to Dyer at the main camp. So the science acts like a pacifier. Lake is using measurements and taxonomy to convince himself that this thing is just another animal, another data point to be filed away in a university drawer.
Exactly. But it's a trap.
A trap.
Yes, because the more data Lake gathers, the more he realizes that this creature breaks the very system he's trying to use to categorize it.
Because it shouldn't exist.
Right. It predates all complex life on Earth, yet it is more biologically advanced than human beings. So that taxonomic pacifier is just ripped away.
And the triumph of Lake's biological discovery is devastatingly short-lived anyway. Just as he's broadcasting these mind-bending findings, a massive mountain gale sweeps over the Antarctic plateau.
The weather there is just completely unforgiving.
The storm is so intense it completely cuts off all shortwave communication with Lake's camp.
Yeah.
So Dyer and the rest of the team at the main base are just left sitting in the freezing silence, waiting.
And when the storm finally breaks, Dyer organizes a rescue party. They fly their Dornier planes to Lake's coordinates.
But they don't find a scientific triumph.
No.
They find a massacre.
The camp is utterly destroyed. The heavy machinery is trashed. 11 men are dead, brutally torn apart.
Just horrific.
One man, Gedney, is completely missing. All the sled dogs are slaughtered. And the 8 perfect frozen biological specimens that Lake had dragged out of the cave,
Let me guess.
they are gone.
Now, at this point, you would think the remaining scientists would just pack up and flee. I know I would.
Anyone in their right mind would.
But they don't. Dyer and a graduate student named Danforth realize they must investigate further. And this leads to the discovery of something even larger than the biological anomaly.
Hard to believe it gets bigger than that.
Right. They take an aeroplane and fly over this towering mountain range that Lake had spotted just before the storm. A range that the sources note dwarfs the Himalayas.
As they cross those incredible peaks, the clouds part, and they look down upon the origin point of these biological impossibilities.
And what do they see?
They discover a city, the Paleogean megalopolis.
A completely dead, eon-old stone city stretching endlessly across the high plateau. And as they land the plane and actually step out into these ruins, the story shifts gears again. It turns into an archaeological investigation.
It does.
Because they find out that the history of the Elder Things is literally written in stone all around them.
Right. The walls of these massive interior rooms and corridors are covered in continuous horizontal bands of mural carvings.
Like Egyptian hieroglyphs, but way older.
Way, way older. They didn't just build cities. They were bioengineers.
Bioengineers?
Yeah, the murals show that they initially lived under the sea. They used phosphorescent organisms to light their underwater cities. And crucially, they synthesized the first Earth life.
So they created life as food.
Yes, initially as food and as labor. And the murals suggest they later allowed unguided evolution to produce the terrestrial plants and animals we know today.
Oh, wow.
So, in this narrative, all Earth life is just a discarded experiment or a byproduct of their agricultural engineering.
Which, again, is just a massive blow to the human ego.
A huge blow.
We aren't the pinnacle of God's creation. We are just cosmic mold that grew on the leftovers of an alien farm. Lovecraft uses all these sociological details to make the cosmic horror deeply relatable.
To build their civilization, the Elder Things engineered a slave race, a biological machine known as the Shoggoths.
Okay, the Shoggoths. Let's really get into the weeds here, because this is where the narrative shifts from a cosmic history lesson into a terrifying cautionary tale.
Definitely.
Our sources describe a Shoggoth as a viscous, shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles. What does that actually look like in motion?
Imagine a 15-foot sphere of iridescent black slime, but it's not just a blob. It is infinitely plastic.
Infinitely plastic, okay.
It has no default biological shape, no permanent skeletal structure. The Elder Things controlled them through hypnotic suggestion. When a massive stone block needed moving, the Elder Things would mentally command the Shoggoth, forcing it to spontaneously mutate its own cellular structure.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the slime would bulge and solidify, forming temporary limbs, heavy lifting organs, or even eyes right on the spot.
So they're basically organic, programmable clay. They had no independent consciousness originally. They were just meat machines acting out the will of their masters.
Precisely. They were the ultimate labor force. But, as we know, evolution is a dangerous and unpredictable force.
Life finds a way.
Always. Over millions of years, specifically around the Permian Age, which is about 150 million years ago, the Shoggoths began to change.
The biological machines started getting smart.
They developed semi-stable brains. They started acting on their own volition. They began spontaneously forming eyes and organs without being commanded, imitating the forms of their masters, and eventually, they rebelled.
Now, I want to pause here and look at the notes, because there is a really fascinating modern parallel drawn here. The concept of the Shoggoth has actually leaped out of 1930s weird fiction and become a prominent meme among AI researchers and software engineers today.
It has, and it's a perfect metaphor.
Tell me about that.
When engineers talk about large language models, the incredibly complex AI systems we use today, they often refer to the underlying architecture as a Shoggoth.
Why? Because it's just a blob of data?
Because it's an alien black box intelligence. We build these neural networks, we train them on massive amounts of data, but we don't fully understand how they arrive at their conclusions inside the box.
It's just math we can't parse.
Right. The intelligence is vast, shape-shifting, and fundamentally unknowable to us. We just slap a friendly, smiling user interface on top of it, like a mask on a monster.
To make us feel better.
Exactly. The AI researchers use the Shoggoth meme to remind themselves that they're dealing with a plastic, potentially uncontrollable intelligence.
And that maps so perfectly onto the Elder Things. They built this incredibly powerful tool, relied entirely upon it, and then watched it wake up.
A classic Frankenstein story.
Executioners.
And this grim historical context suddenly reframes everything Dyer and Danforth have experienced up to this point.
Because now they know the whole story.
Right. Armed with this knowledge of the city's downfall, they realize that the massacre at Lake's camp wasn't just a random attack by mindless beasts.
Right. They continue to explore the dead city, and they find a paper trail. Literally, scraps of paper dropped intentionally, leading away from the surface ruins and deep down into the dark, subterranean tunnels beneath the mountains.
And this is where the deep past violently collides with the present. They venture down into the abyssal tunnels, and they are guided by a scent.
A scent.
It's the smell of common, everyday gasoline from the expedition's missing stoves. But it's mixed with an ancient, unnameable, acrid fader, the smell of the Elder Things.
They follow this smell, and they finally discover the horrific truth of what happened at Lake's camp. They find the missing sledges, they find the missing equipment, and they find what is left of the missing expedition member, Gedney, and the missing dogs.
And the state they're in is horrific.
They have been carefully, if inexpertly, dissected.
The awoken Elder Things did it?
Yes. The 8 perfect specimens that Lake found frozen in the cave weren't dead at all.
They were just sleeping.
They possessed an incredibly resilient cellular structure that allowed them to go into an eon-long hibernation. The heat of the drilling equipment, the warmth of the camp, it thawed them out. They woke up.
But here is the twist that absolutely floors me when reading this. Dyer and Danforth follow the trail further into the tunnel. They are terrified they are going to encounter these 8 awoken, murderous Elder Things.
I mean, you would be terrified.
And they do find them, but they are dead.
All of them. They find the awoken Elder Things prostrate on the tunnel floor. But they haven't just starved or frozen to death.
No, they've been attacked.
They are completely mangled. They have been decapitated. Their 5-pointed starfish heads have been sucked completely off, leaving these ragged neck stumps, and their bodies are covered in a fresh, glistening, iridescent black slime.
It's a moment of absolute shock for Dyer. He's looking at the dissected human and dog remains on one side and the slaughtered headless Elder Things on the other.
It's a lot to take in.
And it leads to one of the most profound epiphanies in all of horror literature. He doesn't feel triumph. He feels empathy, he looks at the Elder Things, and he forgives them.
How does he justify forgiving them for slaughtering his friends? That seems like a stretch.
Because Dyer finally puts all the pieces together, he realizes these Elder Things weren't evil monsters. Think about it from their perspective.
Okay, walking in their shoes. Or tentacles.
They went to sleep millions of years ago when they were the masters of the earth. They wake up from a slumber into a terrifying, freezing new epoch. Their magnificent city is in ruins. They are immediately attacked by these frantic, barking, furry beasts. The sled dogs,
Right.
They defended themselves. And then, looking around at this strange new world, what did they do?
They acted like scientists.
Exactly. They dissected the humans and the dogs out of the exact same empirical curiosity that Lake had shown when he dissected their fallen comrades in the ice cave.
Wow.
They were just trying to understand the new biology of the planet.
Dyer's quote in the text here is absolutely shattering. He looks down at the mangled bodies of the aliens and says, radiates, vegetables, monstrosities, star spawn, whatever they had been, they were men.
They were men.
It gives me chills just thinking about it. That is such a radical subversion of traditional horror. Lovecraft spends pages and pages setting up these entities as the ultimate other. They are alien. They are biology-breaking monstrosities that predate our evolution. But in the end, they are a perfect mirror image of the Miskatonic scientists.
As a historian of science, I view this as the ultimate leveling of empirical arrogance. Dyer finally recognizes them as peers. They were fellow scientists, they were explorers, driven by the exact same urge to understand their environment, to map their reality. When they woke up, they didn't just rampage, they read the murals of their ruined city just as Dyer and Danforth did. They tried to piece together what happened to their civilization. They tried to find a way to survive in the subterranean abyss.
So if the Elder Things are the humans of this scenario, if they're the true masters of Earth, driven by science and reason and civilization, then what does that make us? What is humanity in this grand cosmic picture?
That is the existential dread at the absolute heart of the story. It completely strips away human exceptionalism. If the Elder Things are the true men of Earth's history, then humanity is just a cosmic accident.
An accident.
We're just a byproduct of discarded organic material that mutated and multiplied while the real masters were sleeping.
We are the weeds growing in the cracks of their ruined driveway. The dread shifts entirely. It's no longer the fear of a monster hiding under the bed. It's an agonizing empathy for a fallen peer. The Elder Things aren't the villains of the story. They are the tragic protagonists of Earth's history. And humanity is just an irrelevant footnote at the very end of the timeline.
But that profound philosophical empathy for the slaughtered Elder Things is instantly, violently shattered. Because Dyer and Danforth realize what killed them.
The Shoggoth.
That fresh, iridescent black slime on their headless bodies isn't a relic of the Permian Age. It's wet. It's fresh.
The murderers are still in the tunnels. And this is where the sensory assault begins. The smell in the tunnel shifts. It intensifies from the pungent, acrid odor of the Elder Things to something infinitely more foul, something reminiscent of 1,000 opened graves.
A pallid mist rolls forward out of the subterranean abyss, illuminated by a faint, unnatural phosphorescence.
And then they hear it. A sound echoing up from the darkness ahead of them.
It's a bizarre musical piping sound. The notes say it covers a singularly wide range, far beyond human vocal cords, and it forms these distinct rhythmic syllables, Tekeli-li, Tekeli-li.
And then the physical horror finally arrives. Out of the mist oozes a vanguard of shifting, self-luminous black slime. It is 15 feet tall, filling the entire tunnel.
It is covered in pustules of greenish light, with myriads of temporary eyes constantly forming, blinking, and unforming on its surface as it moves. Dyer describes it slithering toward them like a vast, onrushing subway train.
It is a living Shoggoth. It survived in the deep abyssal oceans beneath the ice for millions of years. But the thing that terrifies me the most isn't the slime or the eyes, it's the sound.
The sound is awful.
The origin of the Tekeli-li is just bone-chilling when you think about the mechanics of it.
Right, let's explain why that sound is so horrifying. The Shoggoths, by their very biological nature, have no permanent vocal organs.
None.
They were created to be plastic tools. They only have what they spontaneously form. So the only way they can make sound is by mocking and mimicking.
They are mimicking the bygone voices of the masters they slaughtered. That musical piping sound was the complex language of the Elder Things.
And now, millions of years after the Elder Things civilization fell, this bubbling mass of slime is just echoing their voices down the empty corridors.
It's like a parrot repeating the screams of a murdered owner.
Utter panic.
Dyer and Danforth turn and run. They're forced into a frantic escape through the dark. They run for their lives up a 60-foot archaic spiral ramp, bursting through a rookery of giant, blind albino penguins that have evolved in the dark tunnels over millions of years.
Such a surreal detail.
They're slipping on the guano, fighting for breath in the freezing air, all while fleeing from this relentless mocking cry of the slime echoing up the ramp behind them.
Tekeli-li, Tekeli-li. Finally reach the surface. They make it back to the waiting aeroplane, panting, exhausted, their minds hanging by an absolute thread.
They start the gasoline engines that Pabody so carefully engineered, and they take off, leaving the nightmare city and the creeping mist behind them.
Now, in any normal narrative, the physical escape would be the climax. You get to the plane, you fly away, the monster is trapped on the ground. End of story.
But Lovecraft saves the most devastating blow for the sky.
He does. They're flying away, gaining altitude over the Antarctic plateau. And Danforth, who, as we established, is highly strung, who has read forbidden, sanity-shattering texts like the Necronomicon back at the Miskatonic University library, he makes a mistake.
He looks back.
He looks back. He looks past the churning zenith clouds, and he sees something in the uncharted west, far beyond the Paleogen megalopolis.
Okay, what does he see?
He sees a remote, towering, needle-pointed range of violet mountains. This isn't just another geologic formation. This is the archetype of the dreaded Kadath in the cold wastes.
And the mere glimpse of this place, Just the visual geometry of those violet peaks completely breaks Danforth's mind.
Snaps it in two.
He shrieks Tekeli-li, echoing the Shoggoth. What broke Danforth wasn't the Shoggoth, it was the recognition that followed. That a civilization vastly older, vastly more intelligent than ours, one that had mastered biology, architecture, and interstellar travel, was ultimately consumed by something it created and could no longer control.
And that's the thought Lovecraft leaves buried in the ice. Not a monster story, a warning. Because the Elder Things didn't fall to an alien threat. They fell to their own ambition, to their own creation. And 90 years later, we are having the same conversation, not about barrel-shaped entities in Antarctic tunnels, but about the artificial minds we are building right now, today, in our own image.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering question to explore on your own. If the Shoggoths, a created artificial labor force built purely for convenience, ultimately outlived and destroyed their hyper-advanced creators, what does that suggest about humanity's own relentless drive to build artificial minds in our own image?
As we push forward with our own synthetic intelligences, are we merely the Elder Things of tomorrow?
And if we are, when we are finally gone, when our cities are in ruins, what will our creations whisper in the dark?
It makes you look at that high-tech pay-body drill cutting so confidently into the ice in a very different way, doesn't it?
It really does. It's not a tool of mastery. It's just a shovel digging in the dark.